Mental health has always been a taboo in our cultures. Berak Hussain, an accomplished therapist from Ottawa, Canada, has always held a passion and desire to help our communities feel more comfortable talking about these issues. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and a Master's in Educational Counseling from the University of Ottawa. Professionally, she is the International Students Counselor at a university in the nation's capital. Her enthusiasm and passion for helping people battle mental health difficulties is truly infectious. She works with her clients to heal through the soul. Not only has she spearheaded the first ever Muslim mental health conference in Canada with her Serenity Islamic Mental Health Awareness Group, she has also hosted workshops in the UK, Australia, and right here in Canada, through her work as the Muslim counselor.
To be able to help somebody and help them explore their potential, help them work through the journey of their struggle is incredible to watch and to be a part of. And that's always been something that I've been drawn to since I was very young. And it's a part of the work that I do as a professional psychotherapist. And the challenges that people come across could be so simple, from not doing well in their courses or having an issue with their roommate, to deeper issues such as depression, anxiety, having thoughts of suicide, relationship issues, domestic violence, you name it. I've seen it all. And the struggle, again, that these people go through, the resilience that they have, and still be able to go out and do what they have to do in their normal lives when you know that they're struggling, is incredible to watch. I see potential in people. I see an aura. And not many people have that ability to see people and read people like that. People are really good at hiding, putting on a face, a mask. Some of us have the ability to look through that and read. And subhanAllah, since I was very young, I've been able to do that and connect with people, young or old. And I find it, again, to be able to tap into somebody's soul by looking at their aura is an incredible position to be in. And to be able to do that as work, it doesn't feel like work. And again, bringing science, psychology, faith, Islam all into one medium like this is what I thrive on and I grow on. I identify myself as a Canadian, Iraqi, Karbala'i follower of Ahlulbayt, alayhim salam, alhamdulillah. And I didn't come to that identity very easily. I was born in the States to parents who were international students and could not go back to my country because of the war and what was happening in the world. And after that, growing up in England and living in different parts of the Middle East and then settling in Canada had a huge impact on me being able to identify myself through these different parts. And growing up in Canada definitely had a huge impact on being able to understand these different parts of my identity. For example, growing up in high school in a Western school with a hijab, and yes, I was very lucky to go to a high school where there was quite a bit of diversity. I wasn't the only one wearing the hijab, but that wasn't the case growing up. And putting on the hijab at around 9 or 10 years old was a journey in itself. I was living in Quebec where just the way we looked was a minority, let alone speaking and wearing the hijab. And my mother did wear the hijab there. But the looks that we got when walking down the street, I recall as a child, I would say, oh, we're the freak show. And I would see that in people's faces in terms of how they would look at us. That impacted me deeply in terms of early recognition of Islamophobia and racism and discrimination. We would speak in English because we didn't know French very well. And there wasn't a very positive response back. Needless to say, we didn't really last long in Quebec, and we moved to Ontario. And even then, the different parts of Ontario that I lived in, there wasn't a lot of diversity in terms of visible minorities, such as somebody wearing the hijab. And so crossing the border literally from Quebec to Ontario, I decided then and there, that's when I will wear the hijab. And I recall as we were traveling across the border, there was one of my father's friends was helping us move. And at that point, he saw me before with the hijab and wearing it after as well, which I thought was funny. But that in itself is part of the journey and the process in terms of how people look at you and how this works with your identity as well. And again, I recall very young how that impacted me, and growing through the hijab and growing through the hijab with it, and how people would look at me and how I would look at it. Of course, we all go through these phases, and I felt almost like a pioneer. Now I look at it that way, but at that point, I was just doing it. And so experiencing a lot of discrimination and racism, and at that point, we can now identify it as Islamophobia. We did not have that term back then. I could see how it did impact me now. And so leading into high school, and this is the age where we have more deeper thoughts about who we are, questions about why are we doing what we're doing. And I recall in high school, for example, one lunch hour, there were events in the auditorium, more musical events that we're not supposed to go to, and you could hear it. And that same evening, our community rented out the high school and the auditorium where they had a majlis. And so I recall very young thinking, interesting how during the day this place was used for these purposes, yet in the evening they're used for these type of purposes. What does that say about me? What does that say about me living in this medium, this cultural identity, dual identity that I have? And I had these thoughts, and of course, these thoughts I studied more about when I went into my studies later on in psychology. But it did have an impact on me growing up in terms of during the day I could be one thing when I'm at school, during the evening back at home, and growing up in a very traditional Karbala'i household, you could almost see the clash. Now, I didn't fight it because I believed in what I was taught growing up in terms of the faith. I did not agree with the cultural ideas as well, and this is part of the issues that we see in our community now in terms of the elders teaching our young ones the customs and the culture, which sometimes really do clash against our Islamic principles. And I did see that growing up, especially when it came to being a woman, a female, and how you're not supposed to say something or do something because you are a female. But then when you look at our faith, that's not what it's like at all. And so there was that conflict when it came to faith, when it came to culture, when it came to Western culture, when it came to Iraqi or Karbala'i Arab culture and interacting with other cultures. That had a huge impact on me growing up. But I didn't realize what that impact was until later on when I went into studying how this affects our psyche, affects our mental health. It affects the journey that we are on into learning about who we are as human beings, who we are, in my case, as a Canadian, Iraqi, Karbala'i follower of Ahlulbayt alayhim as-salam. I've always been a good listener, or so I've been told. And this can be traced back early in my high school days, where a lot of my friends and peers would talk to me about their problems, their challenges at home, with their friends, the struggles, and I would be listening, offering compassion. I would give them advice at times too. And I would share some of these stories and the pain that I saw from them with my mother, who also noticed that I took on and I absorbed their pain. And she interestingly pointed out, so you want to go down this path of helping people, yet how are you going to do that if you take on people's pain? That can really affect you because you get very emotional. And it's true, I would get very emotional knowing how other people would struggle the way they do, or things unfair or painful things that would happen to them. And I would take it on. I would take it on within myself, and I would start feeling what they would be feeling. And so definitely down the path that I have taken to the work that I do today, I've learned how to manage that. And this is one of the things that we're trained in as well. And I hear this from a lot of people who tell me, how do you do what you do? How do you listen to people's stories? And these stories could range anywhere from people who've experienced war, people who've experienced post-traumatic stress, people who've experienced violence, abuse, who've experienced depression, anxiety, thoughts of suicide. And so people will tell me, don't you get depressed listening to people's depressing stories all day long? And you would think, yes, you would, which is why not everybody can get into this work, and which is why a lot of people would burn out also in this field if they don't take care of themselves, if they don't know how to put a barrier and not necessarily block. You can't do that, because then you wouldn't be in tune with your emotions and your human side. And so there is a balance of listening but not necessarily absorbing, and still being able to give advice, still being able to listen and offer compassion, because sometimes that's all people need, is somebody to listen to them and not necessarily tell them what to do. And that in itself is an art, and not everybody can master that. I hope, inshallah, that I continue learning how to master that skill. But it is definitely important to be able to be there for somebody, listen, but also offer advice, offer compassion, and offer a place for somebody to feel safe to open up. And I'm constantly mesmerized and in awe of my clients and people from all over the world who either call or contact me, message me, and talk to me about their problems so openly and freely, because there is a level of trust there, alhamdulillah. Because as we know in our communities, talking to somebody about your problems, especially at the professional level, is a taboo, and there's a fear of this information being leaked out and people finding out about these confidential issues. And so again, being in that position of being able to listen to people's stories, I have to be very careful in terms of taking care of myself as well, by not being devastated by listening to some of the horror stories that people encounter. Yet the beauty of seeing their challenges and seeing their resilience, how they can still go through life, go to school, work within their relationship, go to work, integrate and contribute to society, to their community, yet still going through these challenges, is incredible, and is a testament to the human strength, the human values. And when we look at it from a faith point of view, an Islamic perspective, and the examples that we have, who we turn to, are Ahlulbayt alayhim salam, and we look at the stories and the tragedies that they've experienced, that is our role model. That is who we turn to when we go through our challenges. And when we listen to the stories of our Ahlulbayt, they inspire us, they inspire me. There's an interesting connection between pain and resilience, and again, through the examples that our role models that we look up to, the Ahlulbayt alayhim salam, and the tragedies they experienced, and the lessons that we learned from that in terms of resilience, in terms of patience, in terms of having faith and seeing beauty in tragedy, seeing beauty in very difficult situations. This, for me, as a follower and also somebody who works in this field, sees the interesting connection between the two. And I like to work with that in the workshops and the seminars and the lectures that I talk about when it comes to mental health, psychology, and faith in Islam. Again, these are the role models that we have to look at that concept of pain, resilience, and working through challenges. Within our culture and our communities, there's nothing in between being an engineer and a doctor. And I think a lot of our youth have experienced that. And so coming from that type of background, again, I was expected to be either one or the other. So medicine, doctor seemed the closest thing to my interest. And on that journey, I quickly realized that I don't have the brain for math and science, and although I absolutely respect it and value it, and I'm in awe of those people who have the ability to understand and apply that, I knew that was my limitation. I was more along the lines of writing and speaking, and yes, psychology, which is the study of the self, the nafs. And so part of the journey that took me to where I am today is to recognize that early, understand my limitations, And again, we look at our communities, this is not something that we really get into. It's a matter of, all right, you're going to be a doctor, an engineer, nothing in between. And our youth are not nurtured to really go with their strengths. They're nurtured to go with status and what the family expects. And so I find that a lot of people really struggle with that in terms of, I have the skill set. I love to do this. I love to learn about that. I'd love to be able to combine that and make that part of my studies to become a career. And again, I find that disconnect there within the community. Alhamdulillah, I was able to work through that and understand, again, what my limitations were, but also understand what my strengths were and what I enjoyed. Because when you enjoy and have a passion for what you do, it will not feel like work. And what I do and how I work and how I go through the day, I don't feel like I'm doing work. And this is something that a lot of people I find miss in their lives, and it adds to the stress of their lives. So I discovered this early on when I was studying. I was doing psychology, a psychology background, and I took science courses to help me get into medical school. And I was doing all the things you needed to do, but I still struggled with the science courses, and it took away from my psychology courses, which were the ones that I was good at. In the end, I had the medical school application in one hand and the phone in the other. And I remember calling my mother and telling her, I'm not going to apply for medical school. I found something else. And at that point, I was working at the career services at the university I was studying at. And I really enjoyed helping people look for jobs or finding their career path, as it gave meaning to the work that I was doing. And so I recognized that early. And again, when you combine the idea of helping somebody with discovering their path, that has a huge impact on their lives. So coming to that realization, I felt at peace. I felt this was the right thing for me to do. Alhamdulillah, I went into my graduate studies of counseling, and I've never looked back from that, because that is where I truly grew in terms of the knowledge that I was learning. And this is how it led to where I am today. I noticed a huge disconnect between psychology and faith, and specifically Islam. In one of my classes, the professor talked about Western psychology and jumped all the way to Eastern psychology, and I quickly lifted up my hand. I said, what about Middle East? What about the middle area? You completely skipped over that. He turned to me and said, that is what you are going to do your research on. And at that point, I had already decided what I wanted to do. I wanted to explore more of some of the things that I looked at in my undergraduate studies, which involved theories from Dr. Viktor Frankl, who was a psychoanalyst, a psychologist, and being of the Jewish faith, and he went through the whole experience of the concentration camp. He noticed how people survived because of faith, because of suffering, because of God, because of love. And I really connected with these ideas as a person of faith myself, that through suffering we find meaning. When you have love, that will also drive you through struggle. And when you have faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that will also get you through the struggle. I could not find research in terms of articles and journals for an Islamic psychological or Islamic counseling perspective. There were loosely translated books from Arabic to English about the topic of the self. And so I dug deep to see what else was out there, and I found some small articles on the internet. I did a lot of qualitative research in terms of talking to sheikhs and imams and learned people about the topic, and put that together as my thesis in terms of developing Islamic counseling practices and theories. And I didn't really think much of it at the time, other than I said, well, this is really neat and this is really fascinating. And subhanAllah, fast forward years later, and being a therapist now for around 10 years, I have been using my research in the work that I do clinically with clients of faith and non-faith backgrounds, depending on, of course, who's in front of me. And there's always been an interest of people asking me to come and talk about Islamic counseling theories and practice in the workplace, so to therapists, so they know how to treat clients of this background. And recently, in the last few years, there's been an interest in learning more from our own Muslim community about this. So the disconnect that started as a student has now been connected as a professional. And so let's take a closer look at what this means from an Islamic perspective. When we talk about the study of the self, ilm al-nafs in Arabic, psychology, how much more Islamic can you get than that? The study of the self, which is what our faith is all about. The parts of the self, the nafs. This is in the Quran, this is in our ahadith, this is in our way of life, of spirituality, of lifting the self. Getting closer to Allah is our goal. And so when you combine the study of the self along with our Islamic principle, there is no distinction. It's on the same path, because again, it is that whole way of life, that spirituality, that balance of mind, heart, and soul and body. And again, we don't look at it that way. When we talk about mental health, we don't think about it from an Islamic perspective. What's beautiful about it, that's exactly what it is. And I become incredibly passionate, as you can tell, about this topic, and I light up with it because this is what I do and this is part of who I am, but it's also what I would like the person in front of me to really work through in terms of their challenges. And if we are using faith-based, to understand that there is no separation between the two when it is about self-actualization and reaching your goals at the spiritual level in terms of connecting to Allah and bettering your life and using the Quran and the Ahlulbayt, our two thaqalain, to not steer off that path. For me, there's no distinction. And so when we try to talk about faith and psychology, it's amazing to finally see people open up to the idea and understand, yeah, you're right. This is about reaching that nafs, that part, and overcoming your desires and reaching that nafs al-mutma'inna, that part of the self that reaches that serenity, that rest, that peace. And of course, the ayah in the Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ala bi dhikrillah tatma'inna al-qulub. Verily, with the remembrance of Allah do hearts find serenity and peace. Again, that is the core of what I believe in when it comes to psychology and Islam and faith. It is that right there. Always an interesting topic is, of course, the role of women in our society, in our communities, and especially as Muslim women, visible Muslim women, how they integrate, how they interact, and how much they put themselves out there. There's a lot of social taboos, as we know, and a lot of judgment, and I would probably even call it jahl ideas, in terms of ignorance, in terms of how women can contribute to society, the image. Especially in our societies, in terms of what a woman is expected to give, contribute, and how she's supposed to behave publicly at home and whatnot. And again, when we connect it to what we've been discussing in terms of psychology and our Islamic principles, it's always interesting to bring it back to that, is that our faith encourages that, yet culture does not, some at least. And if we go back to our history and look at our role models, we see, for example, Sayyidah Khadija alayhi salam, Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam, and Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam. These women were almost forced, you could say, in certain circumstances where they would have to speak up, where they would have to voice against injustices that were happening. And so when we look at the women today who are contributing and who are speaking up against injustice as well in our communities, who are their role models? Of course, it's these women. Yet, again, we look at the culture and tradition, and we see that it goes against our faith. Yet our faith encourages that, encourages women to seek knowledge just like men. And our value and our worth is based on our taqwa, our piety, not because of our gender. And we could have a whole discussion and argument and debate about all of these ideas. But when we look at the impact on young women today, and especially the Islamophobic trends that we are seeing, it can really impact the young women when there is a lack of support from the community. And mashallah, there has been a lot of support, I see, in terms of the brothers saying to the sisters, you know, we are your Abbas, for example. Don't think about taking off your hijab. Honor that veil on your head. And you see that is coming out more often as well. And I see that also in my circles. I see that with the discussions of young people that I have with. I see that also with people who come into my office. And again, it's so interesting to see that trend. And it's good in a sense to see these women empowered through the examples that we have from Ahlulbayt alayhim salam. But it's also sad to see that these women have to be in the position of talking about issues when it comes to, let's say, domestic violence, when it comes to violence against women, abuse, when it comes to social injustices as well, in terms of what's happening in different countries around the world and all of these type of things. But you see a lot more women coming out and speaking, and the support there, but also the backlash as well. And I believe this does come from the culture and the backward ideas as opposed to what our faith encourages in terms of equality and the different types of equality that we have within our faith. Alhamdulillah, I hope to see more young women on this path in terms of being empowered through our examples in our own faith, and also see more of our youth and our brothers and the males in our community supporting and lifting and adhering to the principles of what our faith really teaches us when it comes to the role of women in our community and our society. What does it mean to be authentic? This is a big one for me. From my personal life, from my professional life, with my friends, my family, my work, and especially as a therapist, what does it mean to be authentic when you are sitting across from somebody and you are listening to their story, you are listening to their pain, you are absorbing their pain, you are giving compassion and empathy to them, you are giving advice. What does it mean to be authentic in that position? Well, I've discovered it means doing what you actually say. And in a position of responsibility like that, and I consider it an honor to be in such a position, to listen to somebody who's opening their heart and their pain and something so private to you. It's not an easy thing to do. So how does this reflect back to me in terms of being authentic? I've learned over the years through my own struggles in my personal life, in my professional life, in order for me to have any right to give advice to somebody, I must live that advice. I must actually apply what I tell others to do. Otherwise, I'm not being authentic to myself. I would be lying to myself. I wouldn't be able to live long enough with myself in terms of the burnout that I could get out of the work that I do. And it is not an easy thing. Again, this goes back to the journey of the self, the discovery of the self, and respecting yourself in terms of who you are and who the image that you give out there. Is it truly who you are? And I've struggled with that over the years, and through my journey as a therapist to where I am today, I have struggled with that. And so again, the idea of being authentic as a therapist is to truly believe in what I'm doing, is to truly understand what I'm doing and how it can impact others. But again, living and breathing and applying that. And of course, when we look at that from an Islamic spiritual perspective, you know, we could say a lot about that for those people who are speakers, those people who are in a leadership role, for those people who have the responsibility where young people are looking up to them. Do you really apply what you preach and what you teach? What does it mean to be authentic? Especially for those of us who are in the position where other people are looking up to us. What kind of honor and responsibility is that? And we see a lot of people who don't respect that position, say one thing and do another. And I ask the question, how long can this person last, not being genuine to themselves and authentic to their way of life and what they give out there? And again, I'm constantly thinking about that and constantly challenging myself. Again, it's through the stories and the real life experiences that I may have gone through, and what I have seen through others, and how we all inspire each other and lift each other with all of the challenges that we experience. How do you deal with the struggle? That in itself is authentic as well, in terms of putting on perhaps a face to the world, just to get by, just to get through. But within yourself, how you struggle. And again, we can look at that beautiful example of Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam, where she sees beauty in the struggles that she went through. That in itself is so raw and so deep and so inspiring and authentic. And it is an example always in my mind whenever I experience my personal struggles, or when I see other people go through that. The raw beauty and authenticity in acknowledging the tragedy, but also growing from it. And inshallah, I'm always able to work through that.